Hello, my name's Margie Urban, and I am with the New York State Clinical Education Initiative Sexual Health Center of Excellence. And I am here with Shauna Gunaratne, who is an infectious disease physician at the Columbia University Irving Medical Center. And we're going to talk today about a document that she was really instrumental in producing that is part of the clinical guidelines program from New York State. And that is an approach to a person-centered, patient-centered approach to sexual health care. So thanks so much for joining me today. Really happy to meet you by Zoom, at least.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So we are actually at the New York State CEI, Sexual Health Center of Excellence annual conference, and we have an app that is affiliated with the conference where we have lots of resources, and we have included this document that you produced, this guidance document. So I just wanted to get your take on that. Really, what was your charge from the AIDS Institute when you took this on?
Absolutely. So I think I was really excited to be part of this project because I think the whole idea behind it was a frame shift in how we approach sexual health, sort of changing the paradigm from providers, similar to how HIV went from, instead of being a disease-centered model, to being status neutral in New York City and New York State, sort of similar to that, moving away from a disease-centered approach to sexual health and more person and patient-centered sexual health. So that was sort of the charge. And it was also supposed to be a framework and an entry point to segue into other guidelines that are available from the AIDS Institute. So sort of setting the tone for how one should approach sexual health, as well as the other things that are relevant that can be found on the guidelines.
Yeah, so kind of a wellness approach, it seems.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so the guidelines, like historically, have really focused on treatment of HIV and clinicians who care for those who are living with HIV. That this seems a bit bigger. Like who do you see using this document?
I think the focus is still primarily for persons living with HIV and how and for providers who take care of them, how to approach their sexual health. But I certainly think that it is a framework that can be applied broadly because many things in it are not specific to persons who live with HIV. And the intended audience is sort of, any provider who interfaces with a patient, because sexual health is a fundamental part of that person's overall health. And so we're really aiming for providers, primary care providers, HIV clinicians, sexual health providers in the clinic, urgent care, as well as I think, I'm hoping that trainees, fellows, and residents also, and medical students also see this to sort of shape how they view sexual health, especially during formative years of pre-graduate and postgraduate, graduate medical education.
Yeah. You came up with 6, there's a figure in this, so I'll encourage anyone listening to this to really go and take a look at it. There's a figure that is really terrific that takes the 6 principles, if you will, and shows how interactive they are. So I kind of imagine it must have been hard to narrow down to those 6. How did you approach that?
Yeah, and I have to say, Mary Beth Hansen, who is the lead author on these guidelines, it was a collaborative sort of true team effort. So I want to recognize her efforts because much of this is sort of stemming from discussions and brainstorming that we had together. But I think the WHO sort of has a nice diagram in their guidelines about sexual health. They sort of have 6 or 7, and we thought 6 was sort of a nice round number, not too overwhelming for people to remember, but comprehensive and broad enough to sort of capture what we wanted to include. And we were sort of able to narrow our important concepts into these broader 6 categories. And then when we came up with the figure, it just was a nice sort of visual representation of what we were trying to communicate.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh. Would you envision them that they're shown as being interactive, I guess. But would you, if you're a new medical student, say, looking to take this on, and maybe even 6 seems too big, is there somewhere you would start?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the primary ones, and one of the ones we talk about first, is the concept of an inclusive approach. And so that's sort of where it all begins, setting a stage for your patient to make them feel comfortable, to make them feel sort of open and comfortable in sharing whatever parts are relevant to their sexual health. So that, I think, is a great natural starting point for anyone, medical students, as well as those who maybe are looking for this patient-centered approach to sexual health.
Well, it's good to know. So we didn't prepare this interview, and so that's where I would have picked as well. So that's good to know. Have you had feedback or run it by clinicians, like to get response?
So I think we got feedback from the medical care criteria committee, who sort of, who are clinicians who sort of corroborated that they thought that these concepts reflected accurately sexual health. And I think looking through guidelines, many of other guidelines, national, sort of international, institutional guidelines, I haven't gotten any direct feedback from other clinicians. I know within my clinic, many of us sort of espouse the same, approach to sexual health. I haven't heard from any patients either, but I'd be curious to see what they think, because their input is so valuable.
Yeah. And there's some attention to like stigmatizing language, and that's a bit of a hot topic, I think, in medical care, clinical care now, around many conditions, including sexual health. So could you just give us a little bit of an example of some way to reframe something that might have traditionally been used but was stigmatizing?
Absolutely. So I think we're moving away, especially as we're talking about sexual health, from sort of qualifiers such as risky sexual activity or high risk sexual activity, or safe sex, as in do you practice safe sex, because those can sort of have connotations associated with those words. And instead we're moving towards more precise language. So for example, instead of saying, do you have high risk sex or unsafe sex, instead saying condomless sex or sex with the condom, that's very precise. You know exactly what the person is engaging in, and as such can counsel them appropriately. And there's less room for interpretation in terms of, safe versus risky, because that means different things to different people. This is very precise, accurate language, as well as taking away some of that, what may feel like judgment from the provider to the patient. So that's one example. Another example is, you hear, even in lay people, media, et cetera, referring to commercial sex work as prostitution or a prostitute, but instead we are focusing on person-centered language. And again, sort of defining, using precise language, saying a person who engages in commercial sex work, or the noun prostitution to be replaced by commercial sex work. Again, sort of more accurately describing what is transpiring, so then the provider can counsel appropriately.
Good examples. Good examples. I think we all, even those who have been in the field for quite a while, we become complacent and used to our language. So it's really helpful to read a document like this to put yourself into that diagram and try to be sure that you're offering the best care you can to your patients. So I'll think we'll just end here, and we'll encourage anybody who's watching to really go to the document. It's very helpful, and hopefully will give you as a clinician a framework to really embrace this approach to sexual health. So thank you for joining us. I know you're heading off on some sort of vacation, so that would be, I wish you well, and appreciate all your effort in putting putting this document together.
Of course, thank you. And again, thank you to Mary Beth Hansen and the AIDS Institute for their support.